The Exeter Impact podcast is returning for a second series. In Series 2, we talk primarily to colleagues working at our Penryn campus in Cornwall, making a significant impact. The podcast is developed and hosted by me, Emma Sheriff, Impact Evidence and Evaluation Manager for Policy and Systems at the university. In this episode, we welcome Professor Tamara Galloway OBE and Professor Brendan Godley. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
You both lead impactful marine research at the university. What research strategy and research do each of you lead at Exeter?
My own personal research is on marine conservation, mostly on marine vertebrates, particularly sea turtles, but sharks and dolphins and whales and seabirds, but has extended into fisheries, marine protected areas, and then has overlapped at times with Tamara's works on plastic.
Could you tell me a little more about Exeter Marine and its purpose and what that looks like?
Exeter Marine was one of the university's first research networks, and it was a way of bringing to light the great strength we had at the university. It was during a conversation with Tamara and I that we realised that we had a lot of marine people. We'd grown from a university of 400 people to over 1,100 tenured academics, and because 70% of the world is the ocean and lots of people live by the edge of it, lots of our people's research was based on marine things. So we brought it together, we created a website, and we try and foster a community of interdisciplinary interaction, but also share our education and research, both within the Exeter community but outside. And so you can follow us on Exeter Marine on all social media channels if you want to know more.
So thinking about bringing others on board in your work, how do you tend to engage and collaborate with others around your research?
Okay, well, I'm a Professor of Ecotoxicology, so the research that I do is all about trying to understand how contaminants and pollutants that are spilled out into the environment affect the environment and human health. And we've got various themes in the research that we do in my research group. It's all about the mechanisms that those toxicants take and how they affect living systems. We try and understand why some species or some situations are more sensitive or resilient than others. And then we try and use that research to support environmental legislation that's going to protect the environment for the future. Ecotoxicology is such an applied and varied discipline. You really can't do that kind of a research unless you can interact with industry groups, people who are producing different kinds of pollutants, with environmental groups, environmental managers, monitoring agencies, fisheries, the government. All of these people are important in terms of both understanding where pollutants come from, what they do, and how you might control them. So it's a sort of a natural progression from the science that we do to talk to a very wide range of different people. It's integral to what we do to be able to work with other people. And I guess that's how we've ended up collaborating as well, because of the interacting nature of what we do.
Everything that I really want to do is intended to have impact as its outcome. And so usually we're starting with the impact as the starting point. But to do that, we're always working with loads of stakeholders, whether it be the fishing communities themselves, NGOs that seek to support conservation, governments, bodies, local, regional, national, here or in hosting countries. And more recently, with our work with Exeter Marine, a local technology company trying to stop bycatch in marine fisheries. And with these partners, we're designing the questions, designing the research, we're carrying out the research, we're often publishing the research together and sharing the findings more widely. And that means that although our key sort of performance indicators of the different organisations are slightly different, they are all achieved by the activity by working together.
I guess conservation is that, and I suppose studying environmental pollution, the the impact is what drives the research. So it's hard to say that the impact goals were set. It's part of what we do. But I think also it's very international in terms of when you're studying environmental pollution, marine pollution, there are no borders, there are no boundaries for pollutants. Things like plastic will be picked up by wind and tide and moved thousands of miles around the globe. Other types of chemical pollution will be picked up into the atmosphere, into the stratosphere and deposited off in the polar north or the global south. So things that start off in one place don't necessarily stay there. They move to other regions. So it's a very international science.
Sure. We all have a vested interest in our oceans, and I think what you do is really important in that way. So moving on now to think about your impact pathways, are there any particularly creative pathways that you employ?
We haven't found an impact pathway. The impact pathway has found us in a way, because the way that our research has got into policy and regulation is that it was picked up as it was released. As we were doing that research, we were being approached by legislators, by select committees, by NGOs saying, oh, that looks really interesting. It's really sort of telling us something different. Can we talk to you and can you work with us to try and present that? I suppose the pathway that we picked was then to try to work very hard at making the research that we were doing understandable so that it was in the right language and we weren't trying to present something that was overly complicated. What did people actually need to know about what we were doing? What would help people to understand how it affected them, how it affected the environment? Because a lot of people don't think that pollution has anything to do with them. They think it's something that happens somewhere else and involves somebody else. And I think perhaps the research that we've done has been impactful because people can recognise what a plastic bag is. They can recognise what a plastic bottle is, and they know that they've had an intimate relationship with that before it's become pollution. So it's not just somebody else's problem, it's everybody's problem. And I think maybe that's why it's sort of been picked up so strongly.
I think, we no longer work in universities in an ivory tower where we just do stuff and publish in learned journals. We are doing podcasts, we are doing reels, and this is a great role back to Exeter Marine again, is that we have 40,000 followers across social media channels. We have excellent young graduates working to help us promote our work in an accessible manner, from LinkedIn for the boomers all the way down to TikTok for the young people, and trying to make sure that our good message of our hard work and that of our partners is shared widely. And undoubtedly that leads to a deeper appreciation of the work you've done from potential users of the research, but it also leads to other interactions with potential partners and people to work with in the future.
Sounds really exciting and certainly quite creative there around the use of TikTok and social media.
We're still trying to crack TikTok because unless you do a funny dance, sometimes it's hard to get penetrance. But we are moving forward.
Now, in terms of impact case studies, you've been involved in case studies developed in the last round of the Research Excellence Framework. I wonder if we could talk a little about those now. And I understand that you have submitted some to Unit of Assessment 7 in the past that have influenced policy. I wonder if you could talk to us a little about what that work looked like, sort of documenting your impact.
The last impact study that we worked on was all about reducing marine plastic pollution, and in particular a kind of plastic pollution called microplastics. So when plastic is released out into the environment, it gets carried very long distances, but it gets broken down by wind and tide into tiny, tiny pieces called microplastics. And one of the reasons that they are of high concern is that they overlap with the prey item size of many, many different marine animals. So the first point of interest for us was in understanding that those microplastics might be taken up by marine animals, they might have different harmful effects, and they might enter the food chain. And this was something that we were really interested to be able to report on and to be able to bring that evidence to bear and maybe changing the way that things were done. So the impact study that we reported was reporting on some of the very first research worldwide to be able to do that, to be able to measure those microplastics. They'd never been measured previously. So how on earth did you do that? How did you separate them out from all of the things that are around them, work out what they were and where they'd come from? How did you work out what harmful effects they were causing to these different marine organisms right at the base of the food web? And then how did you report that to government? So we were able to do that with those papers, and we were able to report those at a select committee. And that evidence was then used to support a ban on microbeads in cosmetics, which are tiny little pieces of plastic that were intentionally being added to different kinds of consumer products as a way of making them feel nice. It sort of makes your skin feel nice when you rub on these shower gels with little pieces of microplastic in there. But they were washing straight down the drain and into the ocean, and our research was showing that they were being ingested. That very direct link, when presented to the select committee, was a powerful way of showing that link between pollution and its environmental effects, which I talked about previously. People think it's something else and somewhere else. And from the point of presenting at the select committee, it was 3 months before legislation was brought into government to change and ban the use of microbeads in that way. So it's a very quick delivery between presenting our scientific evidence and the legal change that came into place. And that was what the basis of the impact case study was.
Great. And how did you find that process overall of preparing the impact case study?
I think as a scientist, when you're really passionate about something that you do, we were really so excited about the research that we were doing. It was a real chase to find out what was happening and to be able to prove the things that we thought that we were finding. So being able to present that to an interested audience was just really great because, generally as a scientist, you're trying to convince people to listen to what you're doing, and people think, oh, you're right, you're a scientist, and they don't really want to listen. So I found it really interactive and a really positive experience to be able to talk about what we were doing. I'm sure you found the same, Brendan, in terms of actually having an audience that was listening to you.
Yep. I mean, plastics became a big issue, but marine vertebrates have always been a big issue because people love them. And so the impact case study that I was mostly involved with is part of a very large team of other academics at the university and our partners across multiple countries, was to look at the marine protection that had resulted from our research, whether it be the changes to turtle fishing legislation in the Turks and Caicos Islands, resulting from multiple years of working with Marine Conservation Society, the local government, and the actual turtle fishers themselves. Whether it be the declaration of the Ascension Islands exclusive economic zone as a marine protected area, underpinned by a whole bunch of work that was undertaken with UK government funding, but can be tracked back with our connection to back as far as 1998 and ongoing. And then the work in Gabon, where our work and the very careful marine spatial planning undertaken by now Associate Professor Christian Metcalf helped design the Marine Protected Area Network, which encompasses 27% of the exclusive economic zone of Gabon, which puts all of the G8 nations to shame with regard to the proportion which is subject to protection. But all of that being underpinned by the work that we'd been doing on fisheries and tracking marine vertebrates and working with local communities in those countries over and back to that relationships over a long period of time.
And did you find the groups you've been working with were open to giving information for your impact case study, so testimonials, that sort of thing?
Yeah, but we're family. But also those organisations had been assisted in their work by our work, because us getting projects have helped them maintain momentum to fulfil their statutory requirements as governments in those countries. And so we'd provided funding, labour and enthusiasm to help get things over the line. So that was good. I think it was true synergy and partnership.
And what do you think overall ensured your success around the case studies?
I think the fact that there was real impact. Things had changed for the better in the marine conservation, and certainly there were massive changes with regard to plastic as well.
Yeah, of course. And plastics have been so much part of our lives for a considerable time.
Yeah.
So this research is quite groundbreaking, isn't it, in changing our practice and what we understand about plastics in the world.
And I think it sort of helps us to understand how things flow through the environment, how things that we do as individuals can go and impact a seal on the Galapagos Islands. You can look at the label and you can read that it's something that you use in your everyday life, and there it is impacting something many hundreds of miles away. So that kind of research is helpful in terms of the effect that it's having. But I think also in linking people to the environment around them.
I started lately working on the plastics with Tamara and team because I realised that, having been on remote beaches all my working life, that the plastic was everywhere and getting worse, and that turtles are actually a bit of a flagship species for the plastic issue, and that plastics are a flagship issue for the circular economy, and the circular economy issue is one way that we might be able to deal with the worst ravages of climate change.
Yeah. And do you think beyond students, so beyond the university, do you think you've been able to inspire the groups you're working with to change their practice or their work in some way through what you've been leading?
I think undoubtedly it's brought the issue of plastic into the vision of everybody particularly, but also the issue of chemicals and waste and how we as a society are producing way too much stuff and just chucking it all away. And we need a different way of doing that. So a lot of our most recent research has been on the circular economy. It's been on, well, how do you reduce, reuse, recycle and stop the, excessive consumption that leads to the pollution problems themselves. We've been working our way back up the supply chain to try and turn the tap of pollution off at the start.
I think much of my work is in the global south, and rather than inspiring people, I think one of the things that we can do is empower them by being their technical wing and then contributing to capacity building in country so that more effective management can result on the ground. I think that's a very gratifying part of the academic experience in this impact domain, is that you actually help other people do things that you could never do.
And can you think of any examples of a particular group or individual who has changed their practice as a result of your research that you've seen come about that's been really exciting?
Well, the work that we did in the Turks and Caicos Islands, the turtle fishermen, once they realised the scale of the fishery and the adults were being impacted and that the turtles were coming from other countries, then were prepared to change the way that they did fishing. And then with their colleagues at the Marine Conservation Society, they basically worked up a series of legislative changes and found out what would actually fly with the turtle fishermen. And then those were enacted into law and then practice.
And did that align with what you hoped to achieve at the beginning of your career, do you think?
I mean, I think so. One of the very first lectures I can remember way back when I was an undergraduate in Glasgow was sitting in this big lecture theatre. And although it was a biology lecture, it was an environmental scientist who was giving that lecture, and he was telling us all about all of the waste that was building up in waste disposal sites and all of the problems with exhaust fumes and all of the problems with all the cars that were being created. And that was, I don't know how many years ago that was. Almost 50 years ago. That was a very long time ago. But that was the thing that ultimately sort of inspired me to keep going in that direction. And it would be nice to think that then inspired other people to continue the chase.
Very powerful stuff, I think. So finally, I'd like to ask you both what single piece of advice that you would share with our listeners and viewers that can ensure that their research impact is achieved?
I would say do research that you're passionate about. Really be passionate about what you're doing, and then that will show through in terms of the how other people receive it.
It's important that people do blue skies research because some people will happen upon things like DNA or graphene and have massive impacts that will change humanity. But that my model of thinking about the impact, working backwards with stakeholders, co-designing stuff, and staying committed for a long period of time means that you're likely to have the impact you desire.
Fantastic. I think that's a really good note to close the episode. Thank you for joining us. Exeter staff can access the university's Impactful Researcher training series and find details of our impact surgeries via the episode links for support to plan impact in readiness for writing an impact case study.